up? What is up, everybody? What is up? Yo, like we always do at this time, it is Jamil Jude, Artistic Director at Kenny Leon's True Colors Theater Company. Thank you all for joining me today. I am so excited to be with you all for another week, another True Colors podcast. This one is bound to be a good one. You all, I have today an amazing man. His name is Mr. Mark Kendall. He is part of the Bald Black Man fraternity. We're going to talk a little bit about satire and social justice, but I really want to spend the beginning of this podcast just letting you know a couple of things. One, this is episode 21. Y'all, we've crossed over that 20 border. Thank you all for rocking with us every week. And like always, I thank you all for your donations. It really means a lot, especially in this new season that we're in, the season of joy and pain, where we're navigating the pain of what it means to be Black in America by celebrating all of the joy that's around us and the abundance that we live in. Y'all, as this week's weekly joy, I want to shout out two things. First off, Kamala Harris is Biden's VP pick for his campaign. So we are hella excited about Kamala Harris. And if there's time at the end, we'll speak a little bit about what this moment in history really means for us. But I also want to talk about Mr. Mark Kendall, man. If you haven't checked out his YouTube, we put it in our story, so it still might be up there. But his YouTube series is amazing. So without further ado, I would love to bring on my guest for episode 21. Here we are. The latest one is probably my favorite. Mark, what's up, brother?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks so much for having me.
Man, it is a joy to have you, dude. It is a joy to have you. I think this is a first for us here on the podcast to have two bald black men on the podcast. On it, man. We're making podcast history. Bald black men coming soon.
Yeah.
Mark, man, you know, we always kick these things off by asking people just to tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where'd you come from? And a little bit of your journey on how you got to be who you are.
Certainly. So I'm from Atlanta originally, and so from here, and around high school is when I got, really into filmmaking. So I really enjoyed watching Spike Lee movies, and he had those books that would come out with the films, if you remember, like these accompanying books. And at the time, DVDs were around, but the DVD commentary when I was in high school wasn't super common yet. So his books were like DVD commentary before DVD commentary. So you could watch the movie, then you could read like his production diary, basically, and then you could also read the script. And he was always very transparent in his filmmaking process and sharing what went well, but also sometimes more importantly, what didn't go well. And he talked about how big a part film school played in his development. So I chose to study film in college. So I went to Northwestern in Illinois. And while I was there, that's kind of when I discovered a love for comedy. And I joined up with a sketch group called Northwestern Sketch Television, where we would put on video sketches. And this was kind of like right around the time when YouTube first started. So we weren't really putting our stuff on YouTube. We were just like filming sketches and showing them on campus. And so I was doing that for a couple years. And then the summer after my junior year, I did this writing program at Comedy Central that Chris Rock started. And it's called Chris Rock's Comedy Central Summer School. And so you spent like 2 months at their Comedy Central headquarters in New York. And they would kind of like rotate you through different departments where you would get exposed to different types of writing jobs. So it wasn't really like an internship. It was more so you would shadow like different positions. And so the crux of that program was I got to spend a week with the writing staff at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and I got to spend a week with the writing staff of The Colbert Report. And this was the summer of 2008, so it was an election year. Both of the shows were like really hitting on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And a huge takeaway from that experience was that almost all the writers were performers. And at that point, I just saw myself as like a sketch writer, like a filmmaker. But what I learned was that all these writers that were writing for their living during the day would then go out at night and practice stand-up. And so my roommate for that summer, who was also in the program, Reggie, he was a comic. And so they were putting us up in New York, and New York has more open mics than anywhere else in the world. So I started doing stand-up that summer. And then when I went back to school for my senior year that fall, Chicago's like the mecca of improv. And so I took some improv classes because a lot of the Colbert writers in particular came from like an improv background. And so I kind of started doing improv and stand-up. And so then after school, I started joining up with Dad's Garage Theater Company, where I started as an intern, and I went through their ensemble program. And I've since stepped away to kind of focus more on like video stuff and my own kind of thing. For the past like 10 years or so, I've been pretty active like in improv and sketch and doing stand-up as well. So that's kind of like my background.
Man, you said so many things that I like, so many things I want to put pins in and come back to. The first one, we got to talk at the end of this about your favorite Spike Lee. I tried to do top 5 the other day with some friends, and like hard to whittle it down to 5 because it says you got a whole bunch of questions about why you leave some things out and some things in. Okay, the second thing that I really love that you said is that you found that you enjoyed something, but that you wanted to further your development and that you took classes. Man, sometimes we have a lot of young artists, early career artists that come through and stop by the podcast, and they're always looking to learn from great griots and storytellers like yourself. And you are joining a chorus of people who say, take classes, continue to develop. You have a skill, you have a natural talent in something, but classes further develop it. But one of the things that I wanted to go back to is that, seeing your contemporaries or people just a little bit ahead of you, the Daily Show writers, the Colbert Show writers, seeing how talented they were. 2008, man, things were humming on those two programs, but seeing that they were not only staff writers in the day, but comics at night made you want to try something. Can you talk about what was that experience like the first time trying to do open mic stand-up in New York City? Take that moment.
Yeah, I think my first open mic that I remember doing was in the basement of a Maui Taco. So there was a Maui Taco, and in the basement they had an open mic, and it was a bunch of like I shouldn't say that they were all bitter, but a lot of like really bitter stand-ups. And in New York, a lot of the open mics you had to pay or like buy something. So, and I can't remember whether or not you had to pay for that or not. I don't remember. But I remember like signing up on a list, you wait for hours, and then you get up. No one really wants to pay attention to you. But I remember not really having much stage fright, and I enjoyed it. So like I just kind of kept doing it. And so I think what my memories are of those initial open mics doing all those years ago was how honestly unremarkable it was. I was like, oh, this isn't a big deal. And so that is what kind of had me keep going with it. Mm-hmm.
Man, so I feel like I'm super corny. I do the dad joke thing. It feels so unnerving to be in front of an audience and like you're there to make them laugh. Like, can you talk about like what does that feel like? Do you get like Michael Jordan like game time, or what is your process before going out on stage, knowing that like your success or failure is like did you make some random person with whatever shit they're bringing that day laugh or not?
Yeah, I think some really good advice that I got about performing live was that stage time is the most valuable thing. So if you're new and you're trying to get to the point where you're more comfortable on stage, being on stage as much as possible is just the most efficient way to do it. You can read stuff, you can practice by yourself, but at the end of the day, you need to get up in front of people to practice doing that. And so I think if you are, obviously that's not really happening right now, but back when live performance was a thing, as long as you, or I guess speaking for myself, as long as I was getting up as much as I could, you're developing jokes. And after a while, nothing ever hits 100% of the time, but like, okay, if I'm getting up in front of this audience and I go to these jokes, there's a really good chance that they should work. Something should work. And if it doesn't, maybe something was off, but either way, that's still just more information for me to take into the next performance. And then in addition, it's just like I try to record like on my phone as many of my sets as I can. And that's very helpful just because when you get on stage, you're kind of like in a different headspace. You're trying to remember what you got to say. You're paying attention to the audience. There are a bunch of things going through your head. So your memory of how things went might be different from what actually happened. And so let's say you have a set where you bomb or something like that. If you go back and listen to the set on your headphones or whatever later that evening, you'd be like, oh, they couldn't hear me, or oh, I was talking way too fast. And then it's less of like, oh, they didn't like me, and oh, you just didn't connect. And so that takes a little bit of, it becomes less personal at that point and easier to deal with.
That's good stuff, y'all. Today, my guest is Mr. Mark Kendall. We are talking a little bit about his career, how he got to this moment, how he's navigating stand-up comedy in the era of COVID. But we're really talking about just ways that he mixes satire and social justice. We've spoken a little bit about how Spike Lee set him off on a career that ultimately took him to improv stages at the bottom of a Maui Taco in New York City. And now we're talking a little bit about just kind of reviewing the work that you've done. And it sounds like, so I have this like athletic background, and I heard you and I was like, oh, you're watching game film on yourself. Like, as someone who hates hearing themselves talk or hates hearing themselves on video, anytime I have to go back and share these videos, I'm like, hit the sound on mute. Man, like, can you talk about like, what is it like navigating that inner critic in yourself when you're hearing things back? How have you found navigating around sometimes the self-destructive tendencies all artists seem to have in order to go out and try to better yourself?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's definitely tough, especially if you're listening to a set that went poorly and you have to like go back and listen to it. That's really difficult. But what I've been trying to remind myself of, especially more often, more recently, is the negative self-talk rarely is going to help you. And at the end of the day, you're trying to get better. You want to make good stuff. And so the negative self-talk, even if you're feeling that way, if you feed that, ultimately it's going to like make it difficult for you to do what you need to do. And strangely enough, like if you treat your artist self, or however you want to describe like your creative persona, if you treat that with kindness or that's just going to give you more strength to kind of like listen to the bad set and give you more strength to get up on stage again after you've bombed. So that's kind of what I'd say to that.
Yeah, I love that stick to itness, but like that what you need to kind of persevere through that. Man, this moment we find ourselves persevering through a lot. There's the isolation that we're feeling as we are finding digital ways to connect with one another. We miss being on stage and live connection. How have you found navigating your path in an era where live performance is limited?
Yeah, so for me, I've kind of like tried to make more videos since I can't be out on stage. So Bill Worley is a collaborator of mine. He's an excellent director,
Excellent.
editor. Yeah, he's really great. And so he and I find ways to meet up on the weekend to shoot things safely. And that's kind of how I try to connect with folks creatively. In addition to that, there are virtual shows that I do. So Star Bar, which was one of my favorite stand-up shows to do in Atlanta when live performance was the thing, they moved to Twitch. So every Monday I do a Star Bar set. And while it's way different than being in front of people, even just getting to see the other comics just briefly in that Zoom room once a week is a nice way to stay connected to folks. So, and then in addition to that, I still teach a decent amount. And strangely, I think I probably teach more now that it's virtual as opposed to in person. And so connecting with other students that are learning improv or sketch writing or whatever the case may be, those are kind of the main ways that I'm still doing things.
That's good. Yeah, man. I think, we all are finding new ways to be connected and to do our thing right now. So that's big. One thing I have a question for you about is talked about Bill Worley and those collaborations, man. Talk a little bit about your YouTube series. How did this come about? How did you decide that connecting in this way was something you wanted to do?
Sure, yeah. Towards the end of last year, my friend and I, John Mangan, we did this really silly comedy show called Magic and Bird, where I was Magic Johnson and he was Larry Bird. and it was like a live stage show that we put together. And Bill Worley created some video sketches that we did to go along with the live stage element. So we tried to recreate one of those, like, there's so many documentaries about Magic and Bird where they were calling like big games that they had. And so we did like a comedic parody of that, where you would have video of us doing talking heads, but then the live stage version of us interacting with each other. And getting to work with Bill on those videos had me like, oh, you know, this is something that I want to add to, honestly, to create more live opportunities for myself. And so starting at the beginning of this year, we shot a video, and then like 2 weeks later, everything kind of shut down. But because the videos that we put out were kind of well received, we found that if it's just he and I, and we pick locations where there's, you know, where we're not like in closed, tight spaces.
Right.
And I'm already like used to performing on my own a lot anyway. So that's kind of a way that we can sort of like, with a decent amount of consistency, churn stuff out. So we had been trying to put videos out even before everything changed. But once, you know, the pandemic hit, it just kind of altered our work process. So before, you know, I'd probably write sketches with like several characters in them, indoor locations. But now it's just kind of like, well, what can I do by myself, where it's outside, where it doesn't put too much pressure on Bill, something that he can shoot on his own. So that's how we've been adjusting.
Yeah, man. Again, I've really enjoyed the videos. They crack me up. One in particular about Marta moving out to Cobb County, I find like has a specific resonance, especially because the current occupant in the White House is now just giving some money to Marta for increased transportation. But at the same time, he's also fear mongering in the sense that, like, be careful, suburban housewives, because the blacks are coming, right? Can you talk a little bit, Mark, about like how have you found this space, your sketch comedy space, but also a satirical element to really answer and respond to contemporary issues?
Yeah, so, you know, I think part of that probably goes back to some of the time that I spent observing writers at The Daily Show and The Colbert Report. And I think my main takeaway from, well, there was a bunch of takeaways, but one of the takeaways in regards to satire specifically from my time there is find what matters to you, you know? So no matter how specific or hyper local that is. So Marta moving to Cobb County, that's something that's pretty specific, where you wouldn't think that anyone outside of the state would be able to relate. But there's something about it where if you care about it, then you probably also have a point of view on it. And I feel like with sketch comedy, having a unique point of view is going to take you even farther than having the jokes. So it's like you could have a sketch that has a joke every other second, but if there's not really like a point of view, or there's not like some sort of different take, I found that the sketch may not stick, even if it is funny. So I guess in regards to satire, it's like, well, what do you care about, you know, or what do you have, or try to take notice of what you have an emotional reaction to. And so so that's kind of where I tend to go to in my sketches. If there's something that like gives me a strong emotional reaction, even if I don't really know why, to me that's like a hint, like, okay, try and explore this. And not really worrying if everyone else is maybe talking about something else. That's okay, but instead try and focus on, you know, what are you really passionate about. There was a time when during my week at the Colbert Report, I was like, you know, you'd be given little writing assignments, and I was asked to like come up with some headlines, or I forget what it was, but I remember I was presenting to the head writer like just different joke ideas, and I remember like in a constructive way, he was kind of yelling at me, not in a bad way, but like in a constructive way, just kind of saying like, I mean, do you care about any of this? It just feels like you're just writing jokes, you know? And when I would observe him pitching or writing or observing the show, you could really see so much of his passion behind it. And again, that's just kind of where your point of view, where your unique perspective comes out. So.
Was it Wyatt? Was Wyatt there? You know, he was just maybe just a staff writer.
So I think honestly, you know, what's crazy is like I think so Wyatt was at the Daily Show, and he had just come on as a correspondent. And I think when I was there, that was like he was like brand new.
Oh,
maybe he had maybe only been there for like honestly like weeks at that point.
got it.
So I remember like saying hi to him. We didn't like, I was only there for like 4 or 5 days. So like we didn't interact very much, but I do remember seeing him. And I do remember seeing him go do stand up at night afterwards. But I remember he was like brand new and still like, he was a little, from what I recall, and again, this is years ago, but from what I recall, he was brand new and he was a little quiet. And I think at that point he was still just figuring out how the machine worked. But yeah, he was there.
I was taking a stab and figuring out who the writer was at the time, just because I mean I'm a fan of that program. I want to pivot slightly from that first video to a couple of your other ones, but I just want to update everyone that my name is Mr. Mark Kendall. We are talking just about his career, how he does what he does, especially how he's so smart. He has this acerbic wit that he really uses, and he finds ways to have conversations that can sometimes move to didactism, but really finds a way through satire and comedy to really have some really deep and engaging conversations. And one of the things that I really loved, Mark, about this video series is this last one, or at least the one that I saw most recently, where you play a kind of like a salesman who is trying to get people these championship statues of LeBron James as a way to fix our Confederate monument problem. Mark, where the hell did you come up with this idea to do it? And then like talk to me just like, so you write it and then about the performing of it. I really want to know a little bit about, what's going through your mind there.
Sure. So with that LeBron statues thing, I've had a joke in my stand-up for a while where I talk about, for people that want to keep their Confederate monuments up, they should consider recontextualization, where you build around an existing structure to tell the full story of what actually happened. So, so if you have a Confederate monument and you want to keep it there, you should build a bigger statue above it of LeBron James dunking on it. And so that was like the stand-up joke. And so I was just like, oh, I'd like to make this into a video. And so I kind of wanted to see like why someone would have bronze statues. And I kind of thought back to like, like when you're watching a championship game, like the finals, you're watching the NBA finals or whatever, and a team wins, and then immediately they got all those like t-shirts and hats with the team name on it. And it's like they also made those same t-shirts and hats for the other team. You just don't see them because, not there. And I was like, well, what if someone did that with LeBron's statues for like maybe one of the years that he didn't win? He's like, oh man, these are going to sell like hotcakes. And so it was kind of taking that idea in sketch comedy writing or in improv, we have the phrase like, if this is true, what else is true? So if someone was wild enough to build a bronze statue that he couldn't use, what else is true about this character? What else is true about, this world that he lives in? And then that also probably starts to inform how you perform that character as well. And yeah, so that's kind of how that came to be. And I also got to shout out Chris Nick, who is an Atlanta, he's an improviser, but he also works a lot with special effects in the Atlanta area and for all kinds of like music videos and film projects. And he was the person that did the special effects of like the bronze statue dunking on everything. So it was great to collaborate with him on that.
I want to give a special shout out to the 2014 championship that LeBron did not get because my black and silver Spurs won that championship. Shout out to Tim Duncan. I love you, Manu Ginobili. Why I come back. But Mark, what I really loved about that, man, is, and you talked about kind of just being hyper local, and all three, well, the first one and the last one we talked about really having a Atlanta, at least a Georgia focus, if not a Southern regional focus. And here you are, you're an Atlanta native. You've grown up in, what people on the outside have considered the Black Mecca, what all of us in here know a very blue or black dot in the middle of a red or white sea that is Georgia. So I imagine that you've always had to kind of navigate these spaces of being an intelligent, smart, funny Black man in predominantly white spaces, either in the comedy space or right outside of Atlanta. Um, I would really love just to talk to you about like when you're doing this type of comedy that has that social justice, or has that that where you're really making people aware of the hypocrisy sometimes that are in our everyday lives. Can you talk about, man, how you navigate that? Like how is it being in those spaces where maybe people assume like, hey, you're gonna tell me a funny joke about race? Um, yeah, I don't even know where I want to go with that, man.
Yeah, no, I feel you. It's interesting. It's kind of like I feel like it's something that's always changing and evolving. I think that when I was younger, I think I probably put more pressure on myself than was necessary to translate for white audiences to make sure that I came across. Um, because it's like if you're performing for an all white audience and you're doing comedy, you still want them to laugh. And you're just like, well, they can't laugh if they don't understand. They can't laugh if they don't feel comfortable. Maybe you tell those things and then you maybe over explain, over translate to the point where you're not really, you can like lose your point of view that I was saying earlier. And well, I don't think there was like too much of that earlier on. I think more recently I've given more thought to how, okay, if I am in a white space, that's fine. But how can I still make sure that I don't allow perhaps their discomfort at certain points to make me compromise my point of view in any way? And if that means not over explaining something, not over translating something, not going too far, not going to too far lengths to make them feel comfortable if I'm not comfortable about that same topic. Uh, those are things that I'm also trying to keep at the forefront of my mind as I continue to make more stuff. And I think where that line is and what that means changes, from joke to joke, or it changes as I change. Because I mean, your material, at least with stand up anyway, like your material is constantly changing for any number of reasons, So, uh, you know, let's see. Oh, we mentioned like the Marta bit, for example. Like I've had some version of that Marta monologue for like 6 years, I want to say. And while the skeleton has remained the same, other parts have changed, either because like pop culture references are constantly evolving, or maybe, you know, my views on the matter have changed to a certain degree, or I get bored with something and I change it up. So again, kind of going back to creating comedy in white spaces, it's that weird balance where you do have a responsibility, I think, to a degree, to make your audience feel taken care of in the sense that you're trying to show them that you're a professional performer and you're like, I got this. But then at the same time, given the subject matter, your job may not be to make them feel comfortable about the uncomfortable thing that you're talking about. And I think like trying to find the right way to navigate that, that's kind of like what takes up a lot of I think about that a lot. Yeah.
I mean, but it's the medium, right? It's the medium, it's the audience. I mean, that's as artists, we have to figure that out. Um, one thing that I recognize, man, in early part of my career, be it I was in DC and definitely when I was in Minnesota, I found some of the art that I was making, whether the artists, the playwrights, the actors, whether it was a quote unquote black story or not, that the performance space was often white. But then when I realized I started doing, very similar work, and I, moved to True Colors at Atlanta, where our audience base is 80% black, that the things just hit different. There are nuances to the work that may not always get picked up in certain ways. Can you talk about, maybe sometimes the differences when you have a house that looks like you versus, or at least predominantly you, looks like you, versus maybe a majority white house, and what is that like for a performer? Again, someone who was feeding off that live interaction with the crowd.
Oh, for sure. So I have a solo show called The Magic Negro and Other Blackness. And a couple years back, I had a run at the Hurt stage at the Alliance in Atlanta. And so on Friday and Saturdays, I'd usually do two shows in a night. So I'd have an 8 o'clock show and then like a 10 or 10:30 show. Because the 8 o'clock show was earlier, the audience would tend to be a little older, a little wider. And then the 10:30 show would be a little younger, maybe a little bit more diverse. And there was a sketch that I had where a Confederate flag would fall down, and then I'd jump up and snatch it down, and then and then the Migos would come on. And I remember there would be some nights for those 8 o'clock shows where there was one night in particular where there was basically just no reaction. And I think it's because they didn't know who the Migos were, and they probably didn't like me snatching down a Confederate flag, or that made them uncomfortable. But then, like, maybe that same night with the younger, more diverse crowd, that might get the biggest laugh of the night. And it was kind of like night and day. Or there might be other parts of the show when, I'm talking about race or racism. And I think that where sometimes when not all white audience members, but several white audience members might like breathe in or like get nervous.
Yeah.
For a lot of black audience members, it would be almost like a release, and they would laugh. And then when let's say it was more of like a mixed audience where you have a mix of races and ages in there, I think that seeing non-black audience members seeing black audience members laugh and have a good time would sometimes help them loosen up in some way. And not that they would be laughing at the same parts, but it would create a different experience. So you definitely feel that. Also, like, I'm just thinking about other examples. I'm with an improv group called Dark Side of the Room, and we're an African-American troupe. And a lot of the spaces that we'll play in, it depends. Like, if it's one of our shows, the audiences might be a little bit more diverse. And then if we're just kind of like guessing on someone else's improv show, the audience, as well as the rest of the people performing, might be all white. And I think what we have learned over the years is we just play more and more like ourselves no matter where we are. But you definitely see certain types of things hitting different depending on who the audience is. And I think for me personally, it's been like, okay, like things may hit different, but I'm going to try to learn how to be myself all the time, no matter what. And so, yeah.
That's what's up, y'all. My guest today is Mr. Mark Kendall. Man, we have had a wide-ranging conversation, starting about his genesis as a artist, what led him eventually to learn more about improv, sketch comedy, and how he has really used that platform to speak about issues that are really germane to this moment, but also germane to him and important to him personally. You talked a little bit about your show, The Magic Negro and Other Blackness. And in that, man, you're exploring so much. Like, how much of that is like a personal story that you're bringing out? And then when you are personal in your comedy, especially with regards to race, like, what is that like to have to try to find a way to make it comical, but again, with that audience in that reception of a personal tale?
Yeah, well, with The Magic Negro and Other Blackness in particular, there was a lot of that going on. So I've done several iterations of the show and rewritten sketches and changed things as the years have gone on. And in the first version of the show, it was kind of when I started to travel with the show, it was kind of my first time traveling or on my own, doing comedy, like in different places, like Milwaukee or Texas, Arizona, just going to like these random spots to do this material. And what I found was, performing topics where you would raise tension from speaking about racism or other types of things like that raises tension in a room. And so then if you have humor to undercut it, like that release can sometimes be bigger because, you're raising tension in these ways. But what I found sometimes was that audience members might not, I would worry that audience members might not be getting, the full nuance of what I was trying to say in some of those sketches. So it's like, I'm not just talking about race or racism for like shock value or whatever. I'm talking about it because it's like, again, these are things that are important to me that I care about. And so then in later iterations of the show, the last third of the show is me kind of like bringing myself in as a character and kind of opening up about that struggle of using comedy to discuss serious topics, and what do you do if you're afraid an audience member may not understand that. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of been my experience in terms of like bringing in like the personal side to the satire, to the comedy, is that I just kind of try to speak openly about it. And I think that's why the stand-up that I get to do, I mean, now it's virtual, but the stand-up that I get to do is really nice because, you know, you're talking in first person a lot of the time. And you're just like, and so much of it, so much about stand-up is helping the audience understand how you feel about something. So that's been a really great outlet for me to explore those things.
You know, so much of, at least I found, you know, we were doing the podcast one day, and it was an immediate aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, at least us knowing about Breonna Taylor. And I think it was maybe right before Rayshard Brooks. And I used to live in Minneapolis, so I've seen my city on fire. And I think I also saw the city of Atlanta on fire in the first, maybe that first Friday after Memorial Day. And I found myself live on camera choking up and showing more emotion than I normally do in my own personal life, even outside of the camera. And in that moment, where I felt like I had a staff looking at me and maybe an artistic community asking me to lead in a moment that I had never been in before, especially in the middle of a pandemic, but feeling like everything that I had done up until this point still wasn't enough in the ways that I was trying to fight and advocate. And that really tore me up. And I had to have that live. I asked this question to you, man, like, you know, shit is heavy now and always. And because people have looked to you to be a voice to help understand things, whether it be your comedy or whether just because, you know, your sheer intelligence and insight on current events, like, how do you process the things where, yeah, like, sure, I'm definitely always trying to find joy, comedy, satire, something, but like I also experience pain and grief and angst and in these moments. What is it? Talk to me about what it's like when everyone's looking at you like, hey, help me understand this, tell me a joke. We're like, yo, I ain't got shit for you right now.
Yeah, I think that I think it's okay to not like have jokes all the time. I think that you can also just be interesting, you know? And I think with a lot of comedy, you can find things organically without necessarily making what is serious a joke, you know? So there may be nothing funny that's going on at all, but the struggle to talk about it, there might be humor there. The struggle and the miscommunications that arise and people earnestly trying to connect, there's comedy there. So there's comedy like in everything around the thing that will never be funny, but also giving yourself space to not feel like you have to be funny all the time. Because I feel like once you're making something where you're just like, oh, this has to be funny or this has to be good, once you get like a hint of desperation in there, the audience feels that, and it doesn't work anymore. So instead, I think it's kind of like, you know, going back to the Colbert Report and finding what you care about and finding a point of view. It's like finding that first, figuring that out first, and then the comedy will eventually get there. So like a lot of my favorite comics, both like, you know, famous ones or like local ones that I just like to watch. One of my favorite things is watching their jokes evolve over time. So they may be talking about something that happened in their life that, you know, was bad, a negative thing. And the first time that they tell it on stage, it may not be funny, you know, and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth time, it may not be funny, but they're learning how to process it and learning how to talk about it. And then eventually what happens is because they've processed it, they've gained perspective on it. And when you're hearing someone talk about something that they've gained a perspective on, it's like you're not as afraid for them, you know, and then you relax into it. And then now you can laugh about what they're sharing with you. you know. But I think all that's like a process. So I think it's kind of like just giving yourself that space. That being said, though, I mean, I think, you know, if you are in a position where it's just like, yo, we need jokes about this thing tomorrow, whatever it is, like you're on assignment or something like that. To me, what I just try to remember is just reacting honestly, you know, and trying to react from an honest place, and then also just trying to remember, like, be really mindful about, well, what is this joke directed at? And if it's directed at a person, being really careful that you're like punching up and not inadvertently punching down on someone.
Right.
So I feel like if you're careful about that, then you can kind of make a gut reaction and then still stand behind it weeks later, months later, years later, as the story continues to evolve.
Yo, man, we are getting a master class from a talented brother. You know, y'all, welcome to the first ever Two Black Bald Men podcast. My guest today, man, is Mr. Mark Kendall. We've been talking about just his career. We've been talking about the moment. We've been talking about joy. We've been talking about navigating pain. We've just been really I've been loving this conversation, Mark, and just all the gems that you dropped, the wisdom that you shared, but really how honest you've been with us, and we know that our audience really appreciates that. I also want to take the moment to shout out Dr. Miller. Thank you very much for that donation. We really appreciate your support of True Colors and what you all do. Shout out to Utopian School of the Arts down in Clayton County. Mark, man, I want to kind of move us into the second part. I haven't forgot about the Spike Lee thing. We are going to come back to Spike Lee, but I want to know, man, what's bringing you joy these days? We are trying to encourage 52 weeks of joy. Last season we did 52 weeks of Shigrio. So this year, because of Joy and Pain, we want to encourage 52 weeks of joy. What's been bringing you joy these days, my friend?
You know, something over the past couple months that's been great is there's this artist workbook called The Artist Way.
The Artist Way.
And it's like this, yeah, and it's like this 12-week workbook that you go through. And so basically it's like every morning you write 3 pages, and there's also, you read a chapter of a book, and then there are like these not random, but they're these varied artist tasks that you do. It might be something like, think of a time where someone really stuck up for you as an artist, call them up and say thank you. Or wow. It might be like, go outside and find 3 rocks that bring you joy. It's like all these kind of like random things, but what it does is over time, it helps you reflect on like what you value as a creative and your priorities as an artist. And during this time of like, you know, live performance no longer being a thing, it's been something that's been really helpful in terms of grounding me and helping me realize like, oh, you know, like I like doing videos, or I like teaching online, or like helping me sort of like figure out how to continue to adapt and change. And it's also challenging too, because it's like, it can sometimes force you to reflect on like, what are ways that you hold in yourself back? What are things that you're afraid of as a creative that you've like procrastinated on and held off? So it's not so much that it's all like fun and games, but I mean, I feel like the joy kind of comes from the investing in yourself, like as an artist, and the joy that comes from that. In addition to that, you know, I've really enjoyed doing a Star Bar Monday nights on Twitch. That's been really great, just because it just kind of reminds me of like back when doing live performance. You know, you get up not necessarily because you're ready to or anything, but it's just like you just got to keep performing. And what's fun is like when you're like, oh man, I don't really know what I want to talk about today, but then you end up discovering something that at the beginning of the day you didn't have, and so that's been really fun as well. Yeah, I think those are the main things that bring me joy.
But like, hey, I'm just gonna bring somebody on and we're gonna talk about something. I don't know what's gonna come out, but hopefully it'll be good.
Great.
Yeah, say that resource one more time. The Artist Way. I just want people.
Yeah, it's a book called The Artist Way. In fact, I got the copy right here.
Yeah.
It's really worn. I've been through it twice.
Yeah.
It's called The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. It's a 12-week workbook. I I've gotten a lot out of it. And actually, like Bill, who I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
who I've been making movies with, he's been going through the book as well. So we'll like check in every Sunday, being like, "Oh, how was this week for you? What were your morning pages like?" And so having someone else to work through it with has also been great because it helps keep you accountable. Because it is tough to stick with something like that for 12 weeks. So.
Yeah, shout out to Jamie for putting the name of the book in there in the.
Oh, hey, Jamie.
We have a question by Art by Choice _17. Any screenwriting resources? Y'all, please, if you have questions, please drop them into the chat or drop them into the Q&A. Art by Choice _17. Any screenwriting resources?
Yeah. So, well, if you want to use like a screenwriting program or software, I recommend Celtx, CELTX. So that I think that's a free download, and so that's a nice way to have a way to write scripts. For me personally, the greatest resource recently has been like podcasts for me. So if I watch an episode of TV or if I watch a movie that I really like, I look up to see who wrote it, and more often than not, they've done at least a podcast or two. And there are a bunch of podcasts that are dedicated to like different types of screenwriting, be it like for TV or for film. But even outside of just like those strictly writing podcasts, they may be on just some person's podcast talking about their writing process, how they got into it. Same thing for like comics and comedians too. And that's been like a really great resource for me, and it's free. So those are the first two that come to mind that I'd recommend.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Y'all, okay, the moment we've been teasing this entire time, Mark, you don't have to give me a top 5 because I don't want anyone to come back and at you in the comments or anything like that. Man, but just give me a couple of Spike Lee movies that really like tip the scales for you, really top the charts.
Yeah, Crooklyn.
Right.
I really enjoyed Crooklyn just for I don't know what it was. There's just something about it that I really resonated with me, or I don't even know what it was, but I just connected to it in a way that I really enjoyed. School Days is another one, just in terms of like the creativity of like using musical and also like almost basically like documentary footage of the different fraternities, but also just reading about the challenges that he faced in trying to get that movie made.
In his book, the book that movie, yeah.
Yeah. And then Malcolm X as well.
Got to.
Those are 3 that like just come out to me, that come out at the top. But I mean, there are so many of them, so it's kind of tough because after a point I just start naming them. But
Right.
But I think that I think Malcolm X, School Days, and Crooklyn are the 3 that just kind of come to mind for me.
Yeah, good stuff, man. I love that. I definitely share you on School Days. I often put Do the Right Thing up there. And I don't know. Maybe this is something I have to talk to my therapist about, but like, She Gotta Have It is like
Yeah.
one of my top movies too, man. Like, even though it wasn't, I don't think it's anywhere near one of the movies at all. But like, I enjoy watching that movie, especially when I first saw it. It probably was actually one of my first Spike Lee movies that I really remember watching. Like in college, I had watched it before, but like when I was like a serious art student, I remember Gotta Have It, and it was like having my mom back then, man. Mark, I'm gonna take you out on this one, man. I've been asking people for the last, well, I mean, since we've been really navigating this racial inside of our own Atlanta arts community. A lot of people have been speaking up about the ways that they want to reinvent, rethink, especially when we get back together. So I'm going to ask you to do this exercise with me, man. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I want you to think about a radically reinvented Atlanta theater community. And I want you to share with us what you.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that last bit?
Yeah. Okay. It looks like I up a little bit. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. You're still frozen a little bit on my end, but I was asking you to close your eyes, think about what a radically reinvented Atlanta theater community looks like.
Great. I think for me, man, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I would say is just for theaters that maybe have not already done it to really think about how can the whole organization from the top down really reflect the community that they're in, as well as really truly trying to serve the community that they're in through their art.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of what that's what I'd say.
I appreciate it, man. I look forward to, I don't know how many other Ball Black Men, so this might be the first and last Ball Black True Colors podcast, but I appreciate you, brother. You know, my guest today was Mr. Mark Kendall, an amazing comic, an amazing writer, a really great person. I've been really honored to get to know you during my time here in the Atlanta theater community, brother. So I'm thankful for your time here. Guys, check out his YouTube videos. Check him out at Star Bar. You can find that on Twitch every Monday. You know, he's going to do a set, or at least he'll be in the virtual audience cheering on a couple of people. Mark, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate you so very much.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Guys, man, I had fun. Y'all know this is always, I feel like I'm in my living room just chatting with some friends. Oh, okay, I see you, Jeff. Ball Brothers Unite. Yeah, man, we out here. We out here, son. Y'all, I wanted just a couple of moments at the end of this to shout out and share another one of my weekly moments of joy. Yes, we talked about Mark's video. So if you haven't, man, y'all just listen to him talk for about 50 minutes. He is an intelligent, smart man. He is just using this comedy the way in which I hope all comics use it to talk about some issues. What's also bringing me joy this week is that we got AKA, I know my mama is proud. My mama called me seconds after it was announced. Ski win all over the phone. But shout out to Kamala Harris for being named as the VP pick for Joe Biden. You know, hey, we don't get on here. We don't tell you who to vote for. But what we always say is that True Colors, we do our best work when we thrive at the intersection of artistic excellence and civic engagement. And in the year that we just completed our She Griot season, where we were shouting out Black women storytellers, and we understand just the importance of the Black woman story and how Black women have been really moving the Democratic Party on their voices and on their efforts from for the last 60, 70 years, whether it be Fannie Lou Hamer speaking up at the Democratic National Convention and really forcing people to represent Black Southerners in a better way. We know that Black women have played such a vital role in how we have erected our democracy, and it's really going to be someone like Kamala Harris to save it because our democracy is being threatened right now. And I'm thankful for all of the people who have poured into the She Griot season in the ways in which Black women were sharing and shouting their stories. We're really grateful that at True Colors people feel at home to be able to do that, and we're really thankful for you all as an audience that you come to True Colors to hear that. So when we see someone like Kamala get selected and pushed up in this way to advance and to continue to fight and advocate for communities so that we can all pursue a more perfect union, it really feels like the work is being crystallized in a really, really amazing way. So seeing Kamala, seeing some pictures of her on the yard at HU, although I went to Colgate University, shout out to Jeff and talking about the Ball Brotherhood. Just, you know, I spent maybe too much time at Howard University when I was not in undergrad. Definitely when I moved to DC, I spent a lot of time on HU's campus. So I'm kind of beaming with a lot of pride. You know, shout out to my homegirl, Ashley Blaine Featherson, who's another Alpha Chapter HU, aka. I know she's really happy. So that's my moment of joy. Kamala Harris, you know, do your thing, sister. We are here. We are supporting you. I cannot wait to go to the voting booths and definitely show my daughter Journey of what that looks like in this historic first that we're on the precipice of. Y'all, I have been enjoying this thing for 21 straight weeks. We're back next week with episode 22. My guest will be Mr. Victor Jackson, Mr. Glam Rock Soul. You can find him on IG. He is killing it. He got like 30,000 something followers, but he's been really killing it in the music game right now. Victor was in our production of The First Noel. He's done some choreographing in locally, also with us. He's an amazing performer and a really sharp person. I know you guys are going to enjoy his talk with me next week, just like you enjoyed my talk with Mark this week. If you don't have to go out, don't go out. Be safe. Put a mask on. Y'all, let's get back through these. I was forwarded some pictures. There was a local artist, and I apologize for not remembering his name, but who was taking pictures of Atlanta theaters, our empty theaters, and, really showing us what we miss and what we lose. And when I got that picture, man, it hit me with so much sadness, especially to see our colleagues over in the UK going back to theater. And just as a former college football athlete, seeing how precarious the situation is for these young men who just want to play ball, but so many people are bungling leadership at the top levels. I just ask us all to do our parts, wear a mask, help us get back together so that we can go and do live storytelling together, like what Mark talked about earlier and what we have come to enjoy at True Colors for into our 18th year right now. So take care of yourselves, stay safe, wear a mask. Special shout out to my mother-in-law, Charlotte Mounts. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Let, from all of us over here. Yeah, I think I'm rambling, but I also wanted to say one last thing. Go Spurs, go. It's a big game today. I couldn't leave the podcast without giving a shout out to the Spurs and Patty Mills and DeJounte Murray. Please, Popovich, do it today. But let's extend this playoff streak. I got my silver and black on right now because I need to see it. Y'all, I love you, and I'll be back with you all next week. Peace.